Before I start this scenario, you must note this. This scenario will be unrealistic as we can't say for sure what will happen, and I will be changing things for this scenario. Today I will be asking the question, what if the Axis won WW2? Well, let's find out. The year is 1919, and after WW1 Germany is in shambles. They need to pay off huge debt to the Allies, so everyone is very poor. It took only 14 years for a dictator to take power over the weak German state. It was clear from the beginning that the punishment of Germany was too harsh and was bound to cause another world war. Sure, the Ottomans and Austro-Hungarians stopped existing, but they kinda deserved it. But did Germany really deserve it? I say no. The reason is, the Ottomans committed the Armenian genocide. They deserve it. Austria-Hungary was bound to collapse soon anyways. But Germany didn't do anything that wrong. Sure, they used mustard gas in the trench warfare, but the Allies weren't doing any better. For those reasons of Germany's defeat and harsh punishment in WW1, a certain Austrian painter is now in power in 1933. After WW1, Italy wasn't doing the greatest either. The Allies didn't keep their promise and looked like big jerks to the Italian people. So with the Italians fed up, 4 years after the war, Mussolini came into power in Italy. He invented a new ideology, fascism, and the Austrian painter isn't a part of it despite what people think. The painter is a part of the well-you-know-what party was in charge. So with the explanation out of the way, it is time to make some changes to these leaders. Let's start with the main man, painter. He was super untrusting in his allies, which was not a good thing. So for the sake of this scenario, he will be more trusting of all of his allies, but would also look over any huge decisions to make sure they are a good idea. Mussolini was just an idiot, so I feel like we will make Painter teach him the ways of how to have a more than decent military. World War II started when Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. From here the war will be on 1939. After Germany splits Poland with the Soviets, he will sign a non-aggression pact with the Soviets. This was a smart idea, and it let him not worry about a war on two fronts. The Allies were mobilizing troops on the German and Belgian borders. They knew the Germans would attack, just not when. The Soviets started the Winter War, so the Allies were putting troops in Finland, but they also went through Norway and tried to take the Swedish iron fields. They attacked a German ship, so Germany went up into Norway and took it with not much trouble. Also they got Denmark, but since nobody cares, I will move on. The Allies tried to put troops in Belgium, but then Belgium was like, nah, so they didn't. That was great for Germany, as now they are invading Benelux and into France. They would plow through Benelux and fight hard in France, which would fall in just a couple more weeks. With France and Benelux captured, Painter would set up a French puppet state called Vichy France to make it look like the old British ally just switched sides, although it wasn't the case. Here is where the German generals started going crazy, as after the fall of France they wanted to do Operation Selianaka, the invasion of Britain, which is crazy to even think about. The plan was to defeat the British Navy and Air Force, which alone was hard to even destroy a tenth of, and then land hundreds of thousands of German troops to take London and Britain, winning the war. That was unrealistic. The maximum people they could even get through would be 90,000, but that's still generous, and given that there is a high population of people who would sign up to stop those Germans, they would be crushed very fast, and Painter knew this, which is why it never happened. Remember the Soviets? Well, they managed to make the Finns to get a peace deal, and they took some land, but not too much. They also took the Baltics and a chunk of Romania. Guess what? Italy just tried to invade Greece, which would still go bad, and the Germans would rush down to help them. Painter got Hungary and Romania to join the Axis, and later Bulgaria joined, and Yugoslavia got invaded. The Germans went down and got Greece out of the way. The African front was, and still is, a mess. At some points the Allies got ground, and at others the Axis had ground. At the end of the day it will be just a back and forth until someone devotes more troops. Now here is where the changes I made at the start will play an effect. The Germans wouldn't invade the Soviets, as Painter would have a clearer head and wouldn't do it. So with these extra troops the Germans would be the first to devote a mass amount of troops into Africa, which would go well, as the Germans would take a large chunk of land and have plans on how to get all of northern Africa. Japan would have done Pearl Harbor, but in this timeline they would tell Painter and he would go against it, so it won't happen either. But now we have a new end to the war as Japan would take everything in sight. But the Germans would go against invading the Raj, which is superpopulated and isn't worth it. Japan would eventually get China, and the Axis would control almost all of Africa in about 2 more years of fighting. So now we need to talk about a peace deal. Germany would annex part of Poland and annex the French coast, Benelux, Denmark and Norway. They would have a new puppet state with Vichy France. Germany would also gain colonies in Africa, which would restore the German colonial empire. With rich colonies coast to coast, they would be rich with oil and many other resources. Italy would annex French Tunisia and French Algeria, which isn't that much, but they were more trouble than they were worth, so this is in fact a good deal. But they still want more land in Europe than Albania, but the Germans wouldn't let them have it as of right now, but maybe in the future. And now lastly, Japan. Japan would annex China, which would be very difficult to keep because of its vast population and people there who do not want to be part of the Japanese empire. They would also annex the Philippines, British Malaysia, French Indochina and the Dutch East Indies. But now with the war over in 1944, let's take a look at what happens after the war. Starting with 1945. Painter knows that soon enough he will need an heir, so him and Mrs. Painter would have some diplomatic mission, and by the end of the year Painter Jr. would now exist. But that's not the only thing happening this year in Germany, as they are planning the Aryanization of the newly annexed territory. Painter would also be keeping a close eye on Mussolini, who he doesn't trust now. He wants a new Italian dictator, so he would send Mussolini on a trip to Belize, and now one of his most trusted generals is now the dictator of Italy. But now let's fast forward to the end of the 1940s. The newly annexed German territory is now fully Aryan, and Italy is being given land in Yugoslavia and Greece. But over in Asia, Japan would have a huge amount of trouble following the war. The Chinese people are planning a huge rebellion, as the Japanese cannot stay in China for much longer. These people could outman the whole Japanese military. But given how loyal the Japanese are at this time, it would be a close water call, but I will do it anyway. The Chinese rebels would take the least populated lands first, as they could defend it more short term, and they would build up a force and take back some land. With more land taken, more Chinese people would join, and the more progress that would be made. So by the year 1950 the Japanese would be kicked back to the coast, and it would take another 2 years for the Japanese to be fully kicked out of China. This had Painter pretty upset. He now wants a way to force people into his empire. He wants to expand. But in this scenario there is a huge question. Does the US still get nukes? I would say yes, but not that many, as it would be too costly to get a stockpile of nukes, and you could get the same point across with less nukes, so they wouldn't get more than 30 nukes total. The Germans would also get nukes by the year 1952, and they will try to use them to take down their biggest enemy, the Soviets. The Germans would build up manpower the size the world had never seen before, and just 2 years later. But while that is happening, something crazy happens. The Painter dies. This should not come as a surprise, as he was in his 60s a little bit after the war, so his death was just a matter of time. Now Painter Jr. is in power, and he will help with his father's goal to destroy the Soviets. He would get Turkey to join the Axis, and after his forces were finished building up, he would declare war on the Soviet Union. With around 8 million troops and some nuclear power going into this invasion, it looks like a clean and clear win. But is it really? The Americans would help the Soviets build up and get at least 5 nukes, which they would use strategically. When the Germans reach large numbers and close together, they would launch nukes which would kill at least 1 million Germans in the process. The Germans had no clue the Soviets also had nukes, so now they would go all out nuking key cities and make the rest of the world look at them with anger. But no matter the anger, the Soviets would have to surrender to the Axis and get split up by Germany and Japan. In the peace deal, the Germans would annex all European territories and Japan would annex a huge chunk of Siberia. The rest would be a German puppet state. These new territories would be all converted by the end of the 1950s. Japan would be doing talks with Germany to see if they will help them get China back. The Germans said no for the time being, as they need to chill. The US has nukes and could threaten any German advances, considering they are watching the Germans closely. Remember in our timeline how there was a Cold War? Well, this is a new version of it between the United States and Germany, or slash and the Axis. Both sides would build up a nuclear stockpile. The States is considering creating the ultimate alliance to counter the Axis. The alliance would have the USA, Canada, Britain, India, Pakistan, Brazil, Argentina, Portugal and weirdly enough Spain, although they are fascist. But they also fear a German takeover, because they do want to take the whole world to convert to Aryans. The alliance will be called the Anti-Axis Expansion League and slowly more countries will join it as they will also fear a German takeover at some point in the future. I don't see a world where every country not inside the Axis will join this to stop the Axis spread of power. This will take us to the 60s where the Germans, Japanese and other Axis powers cannot expand, but they will get ready to fight a third world war. As at this time they are saying that third time's the charm. Also that is a movie I'm working on, stay tuned for when it releases this summer. But now by the 70s we will have World War III happen. The Germans would try to overrun the AAEL in Europe, but that would backfire as they would take parts of southern France. Over the years the Axis would get beaten, but before the war ends they launch all nukes wiping out all forces on Earth, ending humanity as we know it. This was my longest scenario yet, and this was sort of suggested by I don't know yet 9458. If you want a scenario made, let me know down in the comments. But for now sire,